Yes, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Shemos. It begins on page 293. That is the beginning of the book of Shemos. 1 second. Okay, so it begins, and these are the names of the children of Israel who were coming to Egypt with Yaakov. Each man in his household came, and it lists off the sons of Yaakov. And in verse 5, and all the persons who emerged from Yaakov's loins were 70 souls, and Yosef was in Egypt. Yosef died and all his brothers' entire generation. The children of Israel were fruitful, teemed, increased, and became strong, very, very much so, and the land became filled with them. So the Ramban says, as an introduction to the book of Shemos, that each of the books of the Torah, each of the 5 books of the Torah has a theme. And the theme of Bereshis is the theme of creation, and that's the creation of the world and the creation of the Jewish people, that there's a duality to the creation, that it begins with the creation of the world and ends with the creation of the Jewish people. And the book, and that's why it ends with a listing of the sons of Yaakov and really all the descendants of Yaakov at the time. The book of Shemos is about our difficulties and redemption. It's about us first becoming enslaved in Egypt and the travails and troubles that occurred there to us, and then concludes with our redemption physically from Egypt and the troubles and travails of our assimilation in Egypt, that the Jewish people had become so assimilated in Egypt that we had been idolaters there. And our redemption from that, with us receiving the Torah and building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, where Hashem's presence returned to our midst. And once again, it begins with the counting of talking about the descendants of Yaakov again, because these are the ones who are going to experience this difficulty. Okay, so it says once again, the children of Israel in verse 7 were fruitful, teemed, increased, and became strong, very, very much so, and the land became filled with them. The Kli Yakar says on this very, very much so, that the Hebrew for that is bima'od ma'od, that is very, very much so because of the repetition. But he points out bima'od means it's not ma'od ma'od, very, very much so, it's with very, very much so. And he actually explains that the word ma'od could also mean wealth. And that's what it means when in Shema we say, you love Hashem your God, with b'chol levavcha, with all your heart, and b'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, b'chol me'odecha, with all your resources, with all your wealth. So,
used to be
with your might, it could be translated. How does ArtScroll translate it? Do you know offhand? ArtScroll might say might, but it's understood by many of the
prayer book you've got.
Yeah. Let me
far enough, it says with your might. Currently it says your soul.
Oh yeah, they changed it? Right. There are different commentaries who understand it slightly differently, but the Medrash understands it to mean, and Rashi says, with all your. Yeah, so if you look actually on page 973 in the Chumash, that it has the Shema there, where it's brought in the Torah. So page 973, this is Devarim, chapter 6, verse 4, and verse 5, really. So there it states in verse 4 at the bottom of page 973, Hear, O Israel, Hashem is our God, Hashem is the one and only. You shall love Hashem your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your resources. But right, so here ArtScroll translates, and it could be that in an old edition they followed a different translation.
Old edition
right.
Said might.
Okay.
There are some sitters here
that also say might. That's very possible because it's understood in different ways. But what's that?
I'm saying conservative, it was a might.
It was might also.
I mean, that's how I would.
Yes. That could be the traditional I don't know. It could be that's how the original like Pentateuch translated it. The old translations, ArtScroll that was translating based on Rashi, who says the first Rashi starts out b'chol ma'odecha. Those words he says b'chol mamoncha, literally with all your might. So ArtScroll is translating based on Rashi. Other translations don't necessarily base it always on Rashi. But me'od is translated as your money, as your wealth. And here also, the Kli Yakar understands that the Torah is telling us that they became fruitful, teamed, increased, became strong, and they became wealthy, that they thrived in Egypt. And that's something that the Egyptians saw and were jealous of. So in verse 8, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know of Yosef. The Kli Yakar says, how could he have not known of Yosef? Yosef was the one who the generation before saved the entire land from famine. And he was the viceroy. How could just in a generation or two be completely forgotten? So the Kli Yakar says, of course he knew who Yosef was. What he didn't know Yosef means he didn't understand and take to heart the story of Yosef. And that was that Yosef's brothers had been heard his dreams. He told them his dreams that he was, and that implied that he was going to rule over them. And they decided they had to take action to prevent that from happening. And they ended up selling him as a slave to Egypt. And that's what brought about that action that they took to prevent what his prophecy, what was revealed to him in his dream, was actually what set the events in motion that brought about his dream's fulfillment. And that brought about him being in Egypt and him being thrown in prison with the head baker and the head butler, and the head butler telling Paro about him. And that's what led to him being raised to be the viceroy of Egypt, and all his brothers bowing down to him. So the king of Egypt didn't take this to heart. He didn't understand what the ramifications of the story, which is that if Hashem decides something will happen, it'll happen whatever you do. And there's nothing you can do to prevent it. And the actions that you take to prevent it may actually be the actions that bring it about. And that's what the king of, according to the Kli Yakar, the king of Egypt did not know Yosef. It means he didn't know the story and really understand the ramifications and the meaning of the story of Yosef. So in verse 9, he said to his people, behold, the people, the children of Israel, are more numerous and stronger than we are. Come, let us outsmart it, lest it become more numerous, and it may be that if a war will occur, it too may join our enemies and wage war against us and go up from the land. So the Ramban explains when he said, let us outsmart it, he was saying that we can't do anything to them directly. He said, if we just go and straight up just enslave them without any introduction, so politically it won't be popular, just like taking a whole group and enslaving them. And he said later on we'll see that he was going to throw the males in the Nile, in the river, and kill every Jewish baby, every boy who was born. So there also, he said that we can't do that. He said if we just go out and make have our government do that, we're gonna everyone around us and even within, they're gonna be rebelling against that. We're gonna be looked at as pariahs. So instead, he said we have to do it in a roundabout way. So with the enslavement, they started off with a tax, that there was a labor tax that everybody in the kingdom had to fulfill. And the Jews wanted to prove their patriotism, so they enthusiastically joined in this labor tax and volunteered to do this work. And over time, the Egyptians left and the Jews were not allowed to leave. And that's how the slavery began. And with the children, it says that Paro went secretly to the midwives, that he didn't just make a law that the midwives have to throw the babies in the river. He went secretly to the midwives and told them to do this, to just tell the mothers that their baby had died when they're born, so nobody would realize that it was coming from Paro. And afterwards, even when he told them to kill all the babies, every boy who's born has to be killed. When they did make that, it doesn't say that he made it a law that his policemen, that his enforcers will do it. It says that that it was announced to the people, meaning it was something that Paro made it understood that the rabble, the locals should take care of this, not that it's actually coming directly from the king. So they were trying to deal wisely, accomplish these ends without actually doing it directly. So on page 295, verse 11, so they appointed taskmasters over it in order to afflict it with their burdens. It also built storage cities for Paro, Pisma, and Ramses. But as much as they would afflict it, so it would increase, so it would spread out, and they became disgusted because of the children of Israel. The Hebrew of that, they became disgusted, which Alan seems to appreciate, is vayakutsu, literally means, the Hebrew comes from the word that they were like thorns. And it was like the Bnei Yisrael, Rashi says, were like thorns sticking in their side. The Kli Yakar, though, it just says that the verse actually implies the opposite, that they became thorns because of the children of Israel, meaning the Egyptians were thorns. And he says that a thorn bush is something that's very easy to get in. The thorn bush is usually the thorns point inwards. So it's very easy to get tangled in. It's very easy. It's not hard at all. You go to a thorn bush, the thorns don't push you away, they draw you in. Once you're in, you can't get out because they grab onto you. It says that's how Egypt was, is that it was very easy. Going to Egypt was very easy. Yosef invited us, and we came down and we were well taken care of by Yosef. And in the slavery also, that we started off as a patriotic act of a labor tax to help out our country. And it felt like doing the right thing and very pleasant, and gradually we just found ourselves stuck and couldn't extract ourselves. Okay, so it continues in verse 13. The Egyptians enslaved the children of Israel with crushing harshness. They embittered their lives with hard work, with mortar and bricks, and with every labor of the field. All their labors that they performed with them were with crushing harshness. And that's the labor. And then on to the infanticide. In verse 15, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of the first was Shiphrah and the name of the second was Puah, and he said, when you deliver the Hebrew women and you see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, you are to kill him, and if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared Hashem and did not do as the king of Egypt spoke to them, and they caused the boys to live. It's very interesting that the Medrash says, and this is really the Medrash everyone knows, that these Hebrew midwives were Shiphrah and Puah, and Shiphrah was actually Yocheved, who was Moshe's mother, and Puah was Miriam, who was Moshe's sister. And Shiphrah and Puah were the name of the jobs. That Shiphrah was the one who took care of the mother, and also she was Mishaper Havlad, means that she made the baby beautiful. And Puah was the one who like cooed to the baby and helped the baby calm down. But the Malbim actually understands it, and I've seen this elsewhere as well, is that when it says the Hebrew midwives, it doesn't mean that the midwives were Jews, because the Jews would never listen to this. And in fact, they were Egyptian midwives, and the Hebrew midwives were the midwives who would deliver the Jews. That they had their midwives that they would go to, but they were actually Egyptians. Okay, so in verse 18, the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing that you have caused the boys to live? And the midwife said to Paro, because the Hebrew women are unlike the Egyptian women, for they are experts. Before the midwife comes to them, they've given birth. Saying that they're so experienced, so good at giving birth, they don't really need help from midwives. They do it on their own, like the home birth. And the midwife just comes to clean up the baby after the baby's born. So the midwife, and here you see that it was supposed to be a secret thing, that it wasn't that the midwives would just go there and slaughter the baby in front of the mother, because if that was the case, it wouldn't matter. But they were supposed to tell the mother that it was a stillbirth. But they say they're born before we come, so we can't do that. So in verse 20, God benefited the midwives, and the people increased and became strong, and it was because the midwives feared Hashem that he made them houses. And the midwife said these houses are to, following the medrash, that these midwives were Yocheved, Moshe's mother, and Miriam, Moshe's sister, is that he made them the houses. The houses are referring to the families, and that's the families of Kohanim that came from Aaron, the families of Leviim that came from Moshe, and the families of the kings that came from the tribe of Yehuda. But Miriam had married a very prominent leader of Yehuda, and Miriam, Moshe's sister, was an ancestor of David HaMelech, of King David, who was the start of the Davidic dynasty of the Jewish kings.
That's a wild.
It's Shiphrah, yeah. Yeah, so Shiphrah means, it comes from Shipra, which means beautiful, that she beautified the children. Okay, so page 297, and in verse 22, Paro commanded his entire people, saying, every son that will be born into the river you shall throw him, and every daughter you shall you keep alive. So I already spoke out what the Ramban says about this, is that he commanded his entire people. It means that he let it be known to the people that it wasn't his policemen who were doing it, it wasn't his enforcers, it was that the people should be doing this, that it should be like a mob doing it, not the government doing it. Rashi, though, understands, brings a medrash, is that he told his people that saying every son that be born, not the Jews that are born, every boy that's born, even Egyptian, for this period of time has to be thrown in the river. And the reason
that, to cover up as cover for what he.
so the Medrash says that his astrologers told him, the divinators told him that that the Redeemer of the Jews is going to be born, and that the Redeemer of the Jews is going to be born at this time period. So, and they didn't know if it was going to be a Jew or an Egyptian. So through all of them, I think the Klayakar adds that there's a reason they didn't know if it was going to be a Jew or Egyptian, because the Redeemer was Moshe, who was Jewish born, but he was raised in Paro's household. So I guess from the astrology, it appeared like mixed if he was actually Jew or Egyptian. Okay, so that's what they did. Now on page 297, chapter 2, a man went from the house of Levi, he took a daughter of Levi. This daughter of Levi was actually literally a daughter of Levi. That the man was Amram, who was the son of Kahas, who was the son of Levi. So he was a grandson of Levi, but he was from the house of Levi. But the daughter of Levi was literally a daughter of Levi that he married Yocheved, Shifra, Yocheved, who was an actual daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was good, and she hid him for 3 months. And the commentators say she saw that he was good. Which mother looks at the son and says, "Yeah, this one's a bad one. This one's this one's going to be rotten." So the Medrash says that that when he was born, the whole house filled with light. That she saw that there was a divine light coming from the baby. So and she hid him for 3 months. She could not hide him any longer, so she took for him a wicker basket and smeared it with clay and pitch. She placed the boy into it and placed it among the reeds at the bank of the river. His sister stationed herself at a distance to know what would be done with him. So the Medrash says she could not hide him any longer. Well, she hid him for 3 months because he was born early. And he was born 3 months early. So the Egyptians had seen that she was expecting, but they were expecting him to be born later. So they first came later, and by that point, and that's the point that she couldn't hide him anymore. So she put him in a basket with reeds and put him on the Nile. So Paro's daughter came down to bathe by the river, and her maidens walked along the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her maidservant, and she took the basket. She opened it and saw him, the boy, and behold, the youth was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew boys." And so his sister, Miriam, who was hiding and watching in the reeds, so she saw this and said to the daughter of Paro, "Should I go summon a wet nurse from the Hebrew women who will nurse the boy for you?" And she said, "Go." And and she went to get the baby's mother, and the baby, and Yocheved actually ended up nursing her own son and getting paid for it by the household of Paro. So in verse 10, the boy grew up, and she brought him to the daughter of Paro, and he was a son to her. She called his name Moshe, as she said, "For I drew him from the river." And the commentaries just comment that this was actually the name, what she was named by the Egyptians, but this wasn't the name that he was named by his mother. And in fact, if you look at what it says, his mother named him, it said that his mother saw that he was good, that's Tov, and that was his name. Where am I? This is in verse 2, I think, yeah. That she saw that he was Tov, and that was his name. His name was Tov, or Tovia. But the daughter of Basia, the daughter of Paro, called him Moshe, which means he was drawn from the water, and that's his name. That's what we call him. Okay, so moving on, page 299. So verse 11, it happened in those days that Moshe grew up, he went out to his brethren and observed their burdens. He saw an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man of his brethren. He turned this way and that and saw that there was no man. So he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And the Medrash say he turned this way and that he looked in his future and saw that there was nobody good coming from him.
This is interesting.
Yeah.
Because, if you watch
Yeah.
they compress 1 hour of
Yeah,
the movie out of 4 verses.
out of that, just that incident. That's a
I
big
mean,
plot
there's
point in the
nothing
movie. Yeah.
here that talks about when actually being high up in the Pharaoh's high command.
Yes.
There's not a lot here about him, building the city or helping, being one.
Right. So the Medrash actually says that so in verse 11 it says that it happened in those days that Moshe grew up, and where am I?
I mean, I know it's just a movie, but we know that he lives in the palace. I mean, we know that
Yes.
he was taken as if he was done.
Right. So if you look in verse 10, sorry, backing up the page before we look in verse 10, it says the boy grew up.
Right. So that
In verse 11, it says Moshe grew up. So Rashi quotes a medrash that the first time it's saying he grew up in age and stature. The second one, Vayigdal, could mean that he became great, and that's saying that he actually was occupied a high position in the palace. Once again, it's hinted at, and once the movie takes
right, they extrapolate all that out.
they got to come up with a story. Okay, so moving on, verse 13. He went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. He said to the wicked one, "Why would you strike your fellow?" He replied, who appointed you as a dignitary, a ruler, and a judge over us? Do you propose to murder me as you murdered the Egyptian? Moshe was frightened, and he thought, indeed, the matter is known, meaning that it's known that I killed this Egyptian, and he knew he would be in trouble for that. So Paro heard about this matter. He sought to kill Moshe. So Moshe fled from before Paro and settled in the land of Midian. He sat by a well. The Medrash, though, says about this that when Moshe said, indeed, the matter is known, he wasn't referring to the matter of him killing the Egyptian. He was saying, now I understand why the Jews are enslaved in Egypt. It was something he couldn't understand. Why is this taking place? Once he heard this, he had killed this Egyptian in secret, and 2 random people fighting know about it. He's saying they must be gossiping. That if someone saw it and gossiped and it got around, so even these 2 random people know it. So he was saying, now I understand. If they're gossiping and speaking ill of others, I understand why they're enslaved. Okay. So in so once again, he fled from Paro, settled in the land of Midian. He sat by a well. In verse 16, the minister of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the trough to water their father's sheep. The shepherds came and drove them away, that they were bullying these girls. So, and the Medrash says, why are they bullying these girls? So the Medrash says that it calls him a priest, the minister of Midian, meaning that he was the one who was the head in charge of the idolatry of Midian. But he renounced the idolatry, and because of that, he was ostracized, and they were, his daughters were ostracized, and they were being bullied, and they were chased away from the well. Moshe saved them. Moshe got up and saved them and watered their sheep. They came to rule their father, and Rashi, I think the Ramban says, in fact, that's their grandfather. And Yisro was their father. He said, how could you come so quickly today? So he knew that they had difficulty. And they replied, an Egyptian man saved us from the shepherds and even drew water from us and watered the sheep. And he invited him in, and eventually he married Zipporah, Yisro's daughter. And on page 301, she had a son named Gershom. And on page 301, verse 23, during those many days it happened that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel groaned because of the work, and they cried out. Their outcry because of the work went up to Hashem. Hashem heard their moaning, and Hashem remembered his covenant with Avram, with Yitzchak, and with Yaakov, and Hashem saw the children of Israel, and Hashem knew. So about this, it says Hashem remembered his covenant with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The commentaries say that whenever it refers to Hashem remembering, it means that Hashem's acting on the promise. It's not that it was forgotten and now like, oh yeah, I did say that. But when Hashem remembers, it means that Hashem decides now's the time to take action, and Hashem's acting based on the promise. And then it says Hashem saw the children of Israel, and Hashem knew, meaning Hashem saw that they were, even though they were idolatrous, they did serve idols and were to a point assimilated amongst the Egyptians, but he saw that it was only because of the persecution, but left by their own devices, they would not, in fact, have been idolatrous like that. And that's what it means. Hashem knew that Hashem looked at the depths of their souls and saw who they were. So chapter 3, page 301, Moshe was shepherding the sheep of Yisrael, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. He guided the sheep far into the wilderness, and he arrived at the mountain of Hashem towards Horeb. An angel of Hashem appeared to him in a blaze of fire from amid the bush. This is a famous burning bush. He saw, and behold, the bush was burning in the fire, but the bush was not consumed. Moshe thought, I will turn aside now and look at this great sight. Why will the bush not be burnt? And then in verse 4, Hashem saw that he turned aside to see, and Hashem called out to him from amid the bush and said, Moshe, Moshe. He replied, here I am. And I remember hearing, I'm not sure where, but that it says that Moshe turned aside. Then it says that Hashem saw that he had turned aside and then called to him. That implies that if he wouldn't have turned to see what was going on, Hashem would not have called to him. And that this is the reason why he had his prophecy, was because he was willing to notice what was going on around him, see something that was spiritually significant, and not just let it pass by. He tried to grab that opportunity. He saw something that was that didn't make sense to him, that why this doesn't fit. And he went to look closer, take a closer look, see what's going on. And so many times people have something like inspirational happen to them, and it's like, okay, that was nice, and just move on with their life. But Moshe was not like that, and Moshe saw something inspiring. He wanted to take a closer look. He wanted to examine it, and that's why he had his prophecy. So he said, what's that?
Who wrote all of this?
All of what?
What you're reading?
That's a good question. So the way the Ramban understands, it was transcribed by Moshe. It existed before the world, but it was Moshe taking down dictation.
So Moshe taking down dictation about his own life, what he's done.
Yes. And so it continues. He said, do not come closer to you, remove your shoes from your feet, for the place upon which you stand is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Avram, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov. Moshe hid his face, for he was afraid to gaze towards Hashem. So Hashem said, I have indeed seen the affliction of my people that is in Egypt, etc. I shall descend to hear its outcry because of its taskmasters, for I have known its suffering. I shall descend to rescue it from the hand of Egypt, in verse 8, to bring it up from the land to the good and spacious land, to land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Yebusite. And now behold, I'll send you to take them out of Egypt. And in verse 11, Moshe replied to Hashem, who am I that I should go to Paro and that I should take the children of Israel out of Egypt? And in verse 12, and he said, for I shall be with you, and this is your sign that I sent you. When you take out the people of Egypt, you will serve Hashem on this mountain. So Rashi understands that Moshe asked a two-part question. He asked, who am I that I should go to Paro, and that I should take the children of Israel out of Egypt? His first question is basically, who am I that I'm worthy of carrying out this mission? And the second question is that should the children of Israel, are they really deserving to be taken out? And to that Hashem answered him, for I shall be with you. That's the answer to the first question, that I'm going to be with you, so you're my messenger. And if you're the messenger of the king, it doesn't matter who you are, it matters who you're representing. And this is your sign. And he said about the Jewish people, he said, when you take the people out of Egypt, you will serve Hashem on this mountain, that this was Mount Sinai, where we'll receive the Torah. And he said, there you'll understand who the children of Israel are that you're taking out. And Moshe said, behold, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your forefathers sent me to you, on page 305. And they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? So what does that mean? What is his name? So the Ramban explains that they wanted to, that the question would be that that we use many names of Hashem, and they all mean Hashem acting in different ways. And they're asking what role is in what attribute is Hashem acting in taking us out of Egypt? And in verse 14, Hashem answered Moshe, I shall be as I shall be. This is actually a name of Hashem. And the Medrash says this means that I am with the Jewish people in this exile, in the current exile. I'm with them there, and I'll be with them in all future troubles and tribulations as well. And to that, Moshe said, the Medrash says, and Moshe said, isn't it enough that, they know they're in trouble now? Why do they have to think about any future troubles and future difficulties? And to that, and he said, so shall you say to the children of Israel, you're right. This is what you shall say. I shall be has sent me to you. Just the first part, that I'm with you in this exile. And Hashem said further to Moshe in verse 15, so shall you say to the children of Israel, Hashem, the God of your forefathers, the God of Avram, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov, has dispatched me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my remembrance from generation to generation. So I think it's the Ramban, it might be the Kli Yakar. I think it's the Ramban who explains this, that he's saying that there's two things that he referred to himself. Hashem referred to him as I shall be, and he referred to himself as the God of Avram, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov. So he explains that I shall be is what Hashem actually is. I shall be basically means that I exist, I exist, and I will always exist. And that's what Hashem is existing, and we really know nothing of Hashem outside of how Hashem revealed to us in the Torah and what we see in the world which Hashem created. And that is the God of Avram, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov, how Hashem relates to us. So he says, Zeh Shemila Olam, I'm sorry, this is my name forever, that is I shall be. That's what Hashem is the existing thing. Really the only existing thing that everything else depends on. And this is my remembrance from generation to generation. How do we understand Hashem? How does Hashem, generation to generation, we refer to Hashem as the God of Avram, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov, which is how Hashem relates to us, the world and the Jewish people specifically. Okay, and Hashem tells him, I'll bring you up from Egypt to the land flowing with milk and honey. And he told him that the people will listen to you. And the king of Egypt won't listen to you, and you'll leave with great wonders and with great wealth. You'll leave with the wealth of Egypt. So on page 307, chapter 4, Moshe responded and said, but they will not believe me, and they will not heed my voice, for they will say, Hashem did not appear to you. He's saying, how could I prove to them that I'm in fact a messenger of God? So in verse 2, Hashem said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. He said, cast it on the ground. He cast it on the ground, became a snake. And Moshe fled from it, and Hashem said, stretch out your hand, grab its tail, and it became a staff again. And he said, you'll do this, and they'll believe that Hashem sent you. And he said in verse 6, Hashem said further to him, bring your hand to your bosom. And he brought his hand to his bosom, then withdrew it, and behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then he said, return your hand to your bosom. He returned it, his hand to his bosom, and then he removed it from his bosom. Behold, it reverted to be like his flesh. He put his hand in his shirt, brought it out. It was leprous. It was like all pale and leprous, and then he did it again, and it came out normal. And then the third sign, he said, if they don't believe the first sign, they'll believe the second. And it shall be that they don't believe even these two signs and do not heed your voice. Then shall take it from the water of the river, pour it out on dry land, and the water that you take from the river will become blood when it is on the dry land. So these three signs, what's the meaning behind these signs? So the commentaries say that when Moshe said, the people won't believe me, he spoke ill of the people. He was believing the worst and the negative about the people. And for that, Hashem was hinting that to him by telling him, first of all, throw a staff to the ground, become a snake. A snake is what what damaged us with its speech in the Garden of Eden. And people who speak ill of others are compared to a serpent that's like hissing around, and the damaging mouth is venomous tongue, venomous mouth. And Moshe fled from him, and that's because he recognized he was wrong, and he saw the snake as being punished really by the sin that he committed. Okay, and that's the first sign. The second one is putting his hand in his shirt to his chest and it becoming leprous, and that's also a punishment of one who gossips about others and speaks ill of others, that they would become leprous. And it was also a sign to the Jewish people that they were damaged and like a leper. And then he brought it out and it became healthy flesh to say that they were going to be resurrected as a healthy people. And the third one was, if they don't believe him because they said that Hashem's going to take us, that the tradition was what Hashem promised to Avram is that the nation that oppressed them, that Hashem will take great judgment against. They're saying, where's that great judgment? So he poured the water, became blood, water of the river became blood. The Egyptians worshipped the Nile River. And that turning that into blood was a sign of Hashem taking judgment against the Egyptians and specifically against the Egyptian deities. Okay, then Moshe said, I'm not a man of words, I can't speak well. The Medrash said that he had damaged his mouth as a youth, and he was heavy of tongue, that he had a speech impediment. So he says, I can't speak well, I'm not an eloquent speaker, and I can't even talk straight. And Hashem said, I'll send Aaron, your brother, with you, and he'll interpret for you. You tell him what to say, and he'll be the speaker for you. So on page 311, verse 18, so Moshe went to return to Yisro, his father-in-law, and said to him, let me now go back to my brethren who are in Egypt and see if they are alive. And Yisro said to Moshe, go in peace. So they went, and let's skip a little bit. And there was an incident where a snake attacked Moshe because he had not circumcised his son, because he was afraid for the journey, and that the journey would be dangerous for his son if he didn't circumcise, if he would just have had a circumcision, but Zipporah circumcised him. Okay, and in verse 29 on page 313, Moshe and Aaron went and gathered all the elders of the children of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words that Hashem had spoken to Moshe, and he performed the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed that they heard that Hashem had remembered the children of Israel, and that he saw their affliction, and they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. So the people did, in fact, believe Moshe, especially following the signs. Now, Moshe and Aaron come to Paro in verse 1 on page 5, chapter 5 on page 313. Afterwards, Moshe and Aaron came to Paro and said, so said Hashem, the God of Israel, send out my people that they may celebrate for me in the wilderness. And Paro replied, who is Hashem that I shall heed his voice to send out Israel? I did not know Hashem, nor will I send out Israel. I don't recognize this deity. So they said, the God of the Hebrews happened upon us. Let us now go for a 3-day journey in the wilderness, and we shall bring offerings to Hashem our God, lest he strike us dead with the plague or the sword. So why are they asking for a 3-day journey to serve Hashem in the wilderness? Why not let them go, which is what they intended? And to that, somebody said, it might have been the Ramban, that the Egyptians got them into slavery, like we mentioned, through deceit. Is that they entered into slavery through a labor tax, and just they weren't allowed to leave the labor that they started. So they were also, measure for measure, they were to be taken out in the same manner with deceit. So the king of Egypt said to them, Moshe and Aaron, why do you so disturb the people from its work? Go to your own burdens. And Paro said, behold, the people of the land are now numerous, and you will have them cease from their burdens. And on that day, Paro ordered the taskmasters, this on 315 verse 6, of the people and his foremen, saying, you shall no longer give straw to the people to manufacture the bricks as yesterday and before yesterday. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. For they are lazy, and therefore they cry out, saying, let us go and bring offerings to our God. The old story, like if you have time to make trouble, you have too much time on your hands. So here's some more work. And it's saying if they're looking to serve, to take a vacation and serve their God, they have too much time on their hands to think about that. So they were making bricks, and he stopped providing straw to the Jewish people. They had to search out their own straw, and it became and in verse 10, the taskmasters of the people and his foremen went out and spoke to the people, saying, so said the Paro, I'm not giving you straw. Go yourselves and take yourselves straw from whatever you find, for nothing will be reduced from your work. That they had the same quota of bricks to make, even though now they had to find their own straw. So the people spread out over the entire land of Egypt to gather gleanings for straw, and they pressed them and they beat them, and because they couldn't fulfill their quotas. And in verse 15, the foreman of the children of Israel came and cried to Paro, saying, why do you do this to your servants? Straw is not given to your servants. They're saying it's counterproductive. Now the workers can't produce as much because they're not being provided the raw materials they need. And in verse 17, he said, you are lazy. Therefore, you say, let us go and bring offerings to Hashem. Now go to work. Straw will not be given to you, but you must provide the quota of bricks. And They told them this, and in verse 20 on page 317, they encountered Moshe and Aaron standing opposite them as they left Paro's presence. They said to them, "May Hashem look upon you and judge you, for you have made our very scent abhorrent in the eyes of Paro, the eyes of his servants to place the sword in their hands to murder us." So now the Jewish foremen were angry at Moshe and Aaron that they just made matters worse. And Moshe returned to Hashem and said, "My Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why have you sent me from the time I came to Paro to speak in your name? He did evil to this people, but you did not rescue your people." Hashem said to Moshe, "Now you will see what I shall do to Paro, for through a strong hand he will send them out. With a strong hand he will drive them from his land." So the commentaries ask that, what did Moshe really expect? Did Moshe expect to waltz into to Paro's palace, say to Paro, "Let my people go," and God said, "Let my people go," and Paro will say, "Oh, I didn't realize that's what God wanted," and just let them out? Hashem told Moshe over and over that Paro is not going to listen to you, and they'll have great distress, and then they'll punish the Egyptians. I'll get justice against the Egyptians, and you'll leave with a strong hand, etc. Hashem told him that Paro won't listen to him. So what was he expecting? And the Beis Yitzchak answers that what Moshe was expecting, he wasn't expecting Paro to let them go. And he was expecting Paro to make things more difficult for them. But he expected Paro to make things more difficult by increasing their quota of bricks. You were making this many bricks, now you have to make more. And he understood that's what part of the divine plan, that's what's going to happen. But in fact, Paro acted very wisely. Instead of increasing the number of bricks they had to make, he made them have to chase after straw, not providing them with some of the raw materials. So what do you think happened? It says that they were combing the land for gleanings for straw. So wherever someone found a field that had some straw there, so they would attack it, they would jump on it and grab it, and he would try to get it, he would try to get it, he would try to get it, and it was causing fights to break out amongst the Jewish people, causing lack of harmony amongst the Jewish people. And that disturbed Moshe. He said that this is causing a rift amongst the Jewish people. It's causing them to fight amongst themselves, and if they're fighting amongst themselves, so they'll never deserve to be redeemed. That they can't be redeemed unless they're united, and it's something he understood. It said that he understood that they were in slavery because they were gossiping and speaking ill of others, and now if they're fighting amongst themselves, even the more so. And to that Hashem told him, "Now you will see what I shall do to Paro, for through a strong hand he will send them out, strong he will drive them from his land, that they'll in fact be taken out, and then you'll see that all this fighting is only because of the great oppression they're under, but when they're taken out, they'll be united once again." Okay, shkayach. Everybody have a